Episode 77 of the Hoop Threads podcast. Here with my guy, Eric Singletary. We finally made it happen. The stars finally aligned. Coach, how's it going?
Oh, I'm doing well, Aaron. Thanks for having me, man. I'm glad you exercise patience to have me here. So appreciate having me on.
Man, in our line of work, that's an important thing. So, all right, so let's get right into it. Kind of take us back to the beginning. You grew up in Southeast DC. Talk about how some of those early experiences, with the game of basketball shaped your journey as a player and then eventually as a coach.
Man, it's just like completely different than what you see today. I mean, the level of organized basketball that you see, which is actually really great for the kids in some ways. But I relish the time that I had as a kid, just playing on the rec centers and on the outside courts and just dreaming. Watching a lot of games, and then you go out there and try to emulate the guys you see playing and working on this move and working on that move. So I didn't really start getting coached until middle school when I went to Kelly Miller. But my sports journey, I wouldn't even call it a basketball journey. My sports journey back in my neighborhood was something that definitely kept me motivated and kept me away from some of the trappings of urban life. And I talk about it all the time. Like, I'm just so thankful that one, that I was in the sports, and then two, I was actually able to be good at it.
Got you. Take us back to the beginning and tell us how you got into coaching. So you played, at Sidwell, and talk about your career at Rice, and then kind of what happened after that to lead you to coaching.
Yeah, I mean, I had a good career here. Really was out here competing against all the schools and trying to make a name for myself, and ended up doing that by being an all-Met basketball player, all-Met baseball player as well.
Mm.
And so I was happy to, have a lot of options coming out of high school. And Willis Wilson, who ended up being my coach at Rice University at the time, he was the assistant coach at Stanford under Mike Montgomery, and I was about to go to, commit to Stanford. But once he got the job at Rice, took my visit to Houston, loved it. They were recruiting me really hard. Knew what kind of school it was academically, so I always kind of wanted that balance coming out of Sidwell. And went down to Houston, had a pretty decent career. Nothing stellar, but a good career. I was a captain. Played against a lot of good players, made a lot of great relationships with my own teammates as well as guys from other teams, and just kind of always had a sense of the game in a different way than just playing it. I was fortunate enough to be able to chase basketball a little bit longer and go, try to do the overseas circuit, Portugal and Germany, and then some stateside stuff here when the now defunct, but the IBL, which was the league they had, semi-pro league they had in the States. So I was a typical guy, man, out here just searching, even with a Sidwell and Rice degree, I was still trying to make my life happen, as a professional basketball player, trying to live out that dream and chasing it and failing and, getting no money, but it was still, I don't regret chasing it, because I'm always also able to tell a lot of guys, I know why they're doing that. You don't want to stop a guy from trying it, but you also try to give guys a glimpse of your story, that sometimes your life is in front of you, and there's some other things you could be doing that may be more fruitful than chasing basketball. But I definitely know how it consumes us. I was definitely one of those players.
Mm-hmm. Got you. So what was your first kind of coaching job? How did that come about?
Man, I've been running from coaching for a long time, probably, and I look back on it like I said, went to Sidwell, went to Rice, and so I always thought that I needed a profession that would be commensurate to like my education.
Mm.
When I come back to reunions and hang out with your classmates, they're going to tell you all the unbelievable careers that they're doing. So I kind of wanted to be up to par with them, and I started coaching like literally rec basketball. To bring it full circle, I started coaching rec, 7, 8 year olds. At the time, my son was playing, and took the challenge of coaching that little team out in Clinton. Then we took that rec team and we took it to AAU, a little mom and pop team, the Clinton Celtics. So I cut my teeth there for at least till they got up to 13. So it was a good 4 or 5 years plus that I was coaching at that level, and then got my first opportunity to coach under Steve Turner down in Gonzaga. And had an amazing year watching him do his thing, and Tyler Thornton and all those great players that was on that team. And I had visions of being there for a while, like learning under his tutelage and learning what it was like to be a high school head coach and how to run a real successful program. But lo and behold, 1 year into my career there, I get a call from Sidwell asking me to come interview for the job. And I wasn't going to take it because I didn't think I was ready. I'll never forget one of my mentors said, "You're never ready until you start."
Mm,
So that was back in 08, 07, 08.
mm, gotcha. So, you started at the beginning. I was talking to Kyle Williams, one of your longtime parents there. He said it kind of started with Jamal Lewis, middle schooler that ended up staying with y'all, and then kind of led to, Josh Hart and some of his teams. Um, and Singletary was recruiting Jelani, Josh's senior year. Talk about the game against Gonzaga that kind of put you guys on the map.
Yeah, I mean, that's a game that, upstart program, you're always trying to chase excellence. And, when I took this job, my only goal was to make us more relevant than we were when I played here. So I just wanted to be a tough out, make people respect us, not lose to other people's jerseys. I felt like me and some of my teammates did that, when we were here. And so we got that opportunity to be in the Gonzaga Classic. Obviously, like I said, the great Jamal Lewis started all off by trusting me. I had a long standing history with his family through AAU, so I played against Jamal tons of years, so the family knew who I was, and but they entrusted me to get it done for him. And then, like you said, a year later, Josh Hart comes in here, and your team just changes, kind of overnight. Like, we had my first year here, the guys played hard. We were really good. We set the culture right away. But, when you get a player like Josh and Jamal together, as well as Matt Hillman and some other guys, we had Philip McGloin. We took a team in there that, had no fear. They really didn't. I mean, they were ready for that game. They were excited. We were well prepared. It was a big stage. You never know how they're going to perform. I always laugh because some reporters usually ask me, like, am I nervous before a big game? And I say, yeah, because I can't play. So, you're nervous for the kids. And, as coaches, this, like, you just kind of got the best seat in the house.
Mhm.
And you just got to hope that you're prepared enough and that the kids are bold enough to go out there and be great. And, Josh, the whole team, but Josh put on the show that day. And like you said, those are those impetus watershed moments that get a Jelani Williams to look at Sidwell. And then Jelani Williams leads into Jason Gibson, leads into Saddiq Bey. So every kid begets the next kid. So, I love that about our program.
Got you. And with that, like that tournament, I think that was a Gonzaga Classic that you ended up being Gonzaga, and then you lost to MSJ with Phil Booth later
Yep.
in the year. Beat Dion Wiley with Potomac as well. Some big wins for kind of the up and coming program. Was Josh Hart kind of a heralded guy coming in? Talk about what he looked like before he came into high school.
No, I mean, like, clearly, like, it didn't take me long. I think I have pretty good eyes for talent. It didn't take me long to see him, put him through a workout. But he was coming in from Wheaton High School. So I don't think he was, he didn't play on one of the main AAU teams. But certainly people that I talked to was like, always played with that fire, always played with intensity, always had an unbelievable motor. And so, no, he wasn't supremely heralded or known. And he came in here, made a splash right away. And just worked hard at becoming, not only a great player, but, it's chronicled about some of his academic struggles that he had initially, and whole community rallied around him. And but still, he had to do the work, So I always give Josh and his family a lot of credit for sticking it out. At a place like Sidwell is not easy. So I think that probably proved that he was tougher than even he shows on the basketball court.
Let's go back real quick to the beginning of your coaching career at Sidwell. What were some of the pillars kind of your culture that you kind of came up with? And then I'm assuming you added stuff kind of as you saw it the next couple of years, as far as what you wanted the program to be and what you wanted the typical player to look like.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Aaron. Like, I think for me, that was the compass that I wanted to have. I didn't want it to be so, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, flexible in the sense of, like, you're anything will do. I just kind of wanted to give us a compass. So we came up with toughness, attitude, and intelligence as our, core values. Just very simple 3 core values that have robust meaning to them. But the typical really good basketball players, Sidwell friends, should exhibit all 3 of those qualities, because we just think not only those qualities they help you become a really good basketball player, which leads to us being a good team. We think those are life values that, you have the attitude and your approach and everything you do. That's very important. The toughness to be able to tackle like tough situations and leads into great decision making as well. Then obviously the intelligence to be able to operate under pressure to make the right decisions, to be able to execute, on both ends of the floor. Those are pillars that we think can take you into the rest of your life when you're making decisions, and how you handle things that come at you. So they've been tremendous for us. We've been able to kind of stick to those core values. And I think if you came and asked any of our, all the way down to the middle school players, which I coach as well, if you ask them what our core values was, they'd be able to tell you and explain them as well.
Okay. We'll get kind of into that a little bit more as far as what you're looking for in recruiting, as well as, the future, the teams after, that point with Saddiq, where before Saddiq came in and kind of helped things along. But how do I phrase this? When did you kind of know that you had made it as a coach, or what was the turning point in your coaching career? Like, if this hadn't happened, you wouldn't kind of be in the spot you're in now.
Man, that's some tough questions, man. Some good ones though, some thought-provoking questions. Maybe the Gonzaga game.
Yeah.
I think we had some moments before then, like just turning the corner in the program and competing at the top of the league. And I think some of the validation that we got from the parents, even right away, that summer when I took over the job, we did a couple of team camps and we lost the games, Aaron, but like we played so well and hard, and the parents were just ecstatic. And I was like, why are they happy? Like we lost the game. And so you just learn that, how you make people feel is probably even equally, if not more important than like winning games. So I think for me, just like I said, I probably can point to that Gonzaga game becomes the easiest one to do. But I think that it was a steady progression to the amount of respect that I was receiving from my peers and the validation that I was receiving from them along the way. And just you started seeing teams prepare for you in a way that they probably hadn't had to prepare for Sidwell in the past. I'll tell you one, I got to go with. It was a middle school game, though. It wasn't high school.
Okay.
We would typically play Modern Day, who is known to be, super tough in all sports. And we would go over there, and I'd even ask my boss, like, why are we playing Modern Day? Like, they're too good, and we don't get any of their players. So what's the purposes of us playing them? And I'll never forget one year we took a group over there. I want to say this was Chris Gamble and those guys when they were in middle school. So it was a pretty good, tough team. And I remember some of the Modern Day parents saying that we were playing too rough. And so that was the day that I knew we arrived as a program.
you weren't an easy win anymore, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
I got you. That's the goal. All right, so let's go back. After that big win, I promise. I know Turner's gonna listen to this. Turner, don't smack me. He's gonna smack me if I bring up that game again. So after that, Siddiq came over from DeMatha and reclassed as a freshman at Sidwell. Kyle told me he was 5'9" and he only played 10, 12 minutes a game. Came off the bench as a sophomore and then started as a sixth man, and eventually took over the starting spot when Jelani got hurt that next year. That kind of led to his success. But you had Jelani and Saddiq, and then I think Jason came in the next year. Was he already on the team?
Yeah, Jason was a freshman when Saddiq was a sophomore. So yeah, next year. Yeah, they were 1 year.
Talk about kind of what you saw with that core and kind of what it culminated in once those three guys had graduated. We'll get to the Wilson game in a second as well. But
man, Aaron, that was a time, man. Because I tell people all the time, like this should have been part of that answer about when I knew we arrived. Yeah. It's when Jelani and those guys were freshmen and you started getting your first like real recruiting class. Because Jamal and Josh kind of don't count. I mean, Matt Hillman went 4 years, but Jelani and them coming on the heels of that success, we went 0-12 in the MAC when he was young, and we were transitioning as post Josh era, and just the fortitude and the never quit attitude that I saw in the leadership in Jelani, even as a freshman, taking the lumps that year, and then along with him, Ashton Jones was in that class, Ace Stallings. Ross Young that came over from St. Anselm. So the pieces were coming together. And once we put that team together and you added Saddiq and Jason Gibson to that team, that was and Abbas Salah, who was one of my best point guards I've ever had. That was a group to be reckoned with. That was a really strong group by the time they became juniors. So I think that group itself was probably one of the greatest projects that ended up taking us probably where we are today.
Okay. I had a conversation with Gibby, with Jason Gibson about I told him I was going to interview you, and I was like, I know you got to have a Sidwell story for me. And he said he had a conversation with you at the Governor's Challenge his senior year, and it was a team that was tough and was kind of like your kind of team, but they didn't have, dudes, so to speak. No disrespect. It was just kind of like Gibson and a bunch of guys that just knew their role and excelled in it. And he said you pull them aside and you told them that you needed to take more shots. He was like, man, coach is just looking at me like, I believe in you. Like, you need to do this for us to be successful. And he's like, I mean, I already had the green light, but it was good to hear from it was good to hear him say it. Talk
Yeah, I
about
mean,
like finding those moments as a coach where you have to have those conversations with players and kind of talk about, coaching a player like Jason that didn't really get an offer until after that championship game, versus some of your NBA guys, and talk about kind of dealing with those two different types of players.
yeah, Aaron, I think high school in general is a very insecure time for kids as they grow into their bodies and puberty and maturity and trying to figure out what it means to be a young adult. And I think like oftentimes in sports, it's one of the few places that we can fail and be successful, but the failure still feels real, to the kids. So I think Jason, as talented as he wasn't a very confident player. His confidence didn't match his ability. Like I said, he played well from his freshman year on, but I always knew something special was like really inside of him. And so I just wanted to keep encouraging him and giving him confidence that there wasn't a shot that he could take that was going to upset me. I can teach him to shoot better shots, but I can't coach you to shoot it. Right? I think a lot of kids today, for lack of a better word, they're robots. Right? I always say like they can be coached because they've been coached for so long, Aaron. But if you ask them just to play, they can't play. And so I just wanted to give him that confidence. I remember telling him that his first shot should be from 27 feet. And he looked at me, he goes, why, coach? I said, because you don't have to make it. They just got to know they got to guard you out there to do.
I got you.
So guys with that kind of talent, though, man, you want to make sure that they have no fear, that they have when the buzzer goes off, they're not looking over their shoulder. That what I say to them is just noise. Like you want those guys to be like completely free and like locked in to like play to that wizardry that I think Jason possessed. You know what I mean? Every guy doesn't have that. I try to give all my players confidence, but those ones who are really special, you don't want them to be locked up by anything.
Yeah. Well, I was going to save this for later, but we can talk about it now. How do you decide as a coach when you need to run offense and when you need to run a set versus when to let them freelance? And, what have you learned about taking a step back as a coach and kind of trusting your players in that regard?
Man, Aaron, that's $1 million. I'm sure it's like $1 million question, almost $1 million statement. Because you're right, man. Like I've gotten so much better at that. You know what I mean? As coaches, we often want to exercise so much control because we know or we believe that what we run is going to work, and we all know now 25% to 30% of the stuff we call is going to work. So the rest of it is guys, learn how to improvise and make plays. So I've improved tremendously at allowing them just to make plays that I can coach them through later, but not trying to control like every possession. That also comes, the more talented you get, you don't have to feel as I got to control every possession. I got to do this for us to win. So that comes along with just getting better as well, but also me improving as a coach and learning that I really don't have that much control. And that control that I try to exercise should be exercised in practice, not in the games.
Gotcha. Sometimes it really is about the Jimmies and the Joes, not the X's and the O's.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about kind of culture specific questions. Kyle was like, if you just want to come here for basketball, Sidwell is not the place for you. Kind of describe, our type of guy is something that's on a lot of your social media stuff. What type of families do you want to recruit? What are you kind of looking for in that process as far as questions that you want to hear from parents versus maybe some statements from them or questions from that kind of turn you off and make them think, make you think rather that it might not be the best fit.
Yeah, man, that's super important. I think Sidwell is a place, obviously we already have a low admissions yield. And so we can't really miss, like, of course we've missed out on some families, but we can't miss with the structure of the family that we want. Excellent question. I want families that are curious, right? I want families that are like extremely curious about whether they already know about Sidwell or they have perceptions about Sidwell, or maybe they have no clue what Sidwell is, but I still want them to be as equally curious about what this situation looks like for their kid, academically, socially, environmentally, community service-wise, and certainly we happen to be really good at sports right now. So it's an exciting time, but at the end of the day, Cal's 100% right. I always say that if you come to Sidwell to play sports, you're going to fail. Like, it's going to be too hard. You know what I mean? Like, sports, like I said, it's the only place where you can get an F and be successful, but it's still an F. And so it's not that much winning. You know, you're going to shoot 40% maybe, right? You're going to hit 3 out of 10 baseballs, hopefully. You're going to complete 6 out of 10 passes as a quarterback. So, you know, the bigger thing is like, how do you build network? How do you build community? How do you come to a place? And also, I try to tell families, don't come here and be a guest. You know, especially if you're outside of the realm of, like, if Sidwell wasn't on your natural trajectory as a student, don't come here come here and give us all the gifts that you have, not just physically, but also emotionally, spiritually, and like I said, academically and socially. We want those families who understand that you can, you know, you're making a 40-year decision when you come to Sidwell. It's not something that's fleeting to the point where you're so wrapped up and consumed. One of the things I think we're really good at, Aaron, I think we've hit this sweet spot, that we have kids and families that are totally invested in what we're doing, but also detached enough where it works. Because I think sometimes you can be so consumed by it that all it brings you is frustration. So you got to be consumed, but also detached. You know, you kind of try to put those oxymorons together where the truth becomes in the middle. And so I think just by Sidwell's nature of the schoolwork, the homework, and all the other stuff that comes with this place, hopefully we're getting a family that understands that and then trust me to, you know, help elevate their kid as a player.
Talk about your development plan for your players, kind of, you know, before they arrive, and then once they get there, kind of recruiting to that plan. You know, what have you learned about that process? Because I'm sure that, you know, recruiting just the high school athlete, I'm sure now is very, very different from when you started, even at Sidwell.
Yeah, I mean, it's become like more detailed, right? Like, you really try to, I think high school is the last place as a coach where you do have to have a lot of flexibility. You can't say, like, I'm going to run the flex. You know, I mean, you can, but you can't say that and then think every kid is going to be able to be really good at that. So I think we are the last place where we have to be knowledgeable enough and flexible enough to, like, actually do stuff that fits each group that you have. Each team is different. Like I always say, your program can be healthy because the culture is right, but each team is going to take on a whole different dynamic every year. You try to figure out what to do. So part of my development plan stems back to my playing career. You know, certainly when I went to Europe and just see how they develop players, and they try to make the complete player because you don't know who's going to be what height, who's going to do what. And so you try not to pigeonhole guys into certain positions. I think Jalen Rose said it best, positions were just created for the novice to understand the game. You certainly got to be flexible and versatile. So I think over the years, when you look at a Sidwell basketball player, outside of just being, you know, no nonsense and tough on the defensive end, which is unequivocal for us, offensively, I just think I try to develop guys at their own pace, try to develop them at what they do well, try to expand that, and the stuff that they don't do well, try to shore that up and not make it a weakness. But sometimes I try not to get so wrapped up into, like, being so well-rounded that we forget the thing that we do really well. So I try to get guys to really play to their strengths. But one of the big details that I think I focus on the most is a philosophy I believe in, that the older you get, if you can't pass, you can't play. So I just, you know, we do a lot of passing. And so I just think that, you know, that's a lost art, and not just feeding the post. I mean, just, you know, when I think of a Caleb Williams, the reason I think that he's attractive, in my opinion, is that he can move the ball around the floor. And I think that's an underrated skill.
I think he has a really good feel for when he needs to make a play for himself versus when he needs to make a play for a teammate, or just move the ball. It doesn't have to be the assist that leads to the basket. It can be the swing pass that kind of leads to that. What have been some of the most effective tools in kind of establishing your culture and poise? You know, you kind of mentioned, you know, we'll get to the poise thing in a second, but more establishing culture, especially in practice, as far as kind of what you go into every day in practice, like, all right, we're going to do this, and kind of like how that progresses throughout the season. Because, you know, for people that have not coached before, you cannot coach as hard at the end of the year as you did at the beginning of the year. By then, you're open to kind of be peaking. So kind of talk about what that progression looks like in practice throughout the year.
No, I mean, once again, another excellent question. You know, talking clinics and trying to talk to, you know, I'm the OG now. I still think I'm a young coach, but I talk to some younger coaches like Devin Page out at Grace, who's a, you know, awesome young coach. And I just talk about, like you said, building the season. You know what I mean? It really is building the season. You can't, you know, you try to stay with the fundamentals of what you believe in, whether that's defense, passing, rebound or whatever you want to do. But we try to stay detailed in that the practice looks the same at the start of practice with, whatever drill we may do within our stretching and just trying to get the volume right in practice, guys talking and stuff like that. So I think we're only as good as what we emphasize as coaches. You know what I mean? So I think to me is a daily emphasis on communication, a daily emphasis on toughness. Like I said, our core values, like we want to see who's exhibiting these three things every day in practice. And if we're doing that somewhat as a whole, then we know by the end of the season, like we should be in the place we want to be. I agree with you 100%. Like we do the 2 hours like everybody else at the beginning. And then eventually, after the break, after Christmas, we try to reduce that to an hour. I've gotten so much better at treating the practice plan like a contract. And no matter what we don't do right, when that buzzer goes off, we move on to the next drill. So I've gotten a lot better at that. That's why I said you have to evolve as a coach. Like, there's no guardrails to it. You can go off. There's so many things in your mind you think that and if you don't have a real compass on what you're trying to accomplish, sometimes you can get, that buzzer goes off and you're not satisfied and you're doing that thing for the next 20 minutes and you've messed up the whole practice plan.
In setting up the practice plan, I'm just curious, selfishly, as a former coach, is that something that you're talking with your assistant coaches before practice gets started, or at the end of practice? One day you're talking about what you guys want to cover the next day. What does that look like from a coaching
Yeah,
side?
a little bit of both. If we had a tough practice, I'll ask them like what they saw and like make some notes. And like you said, maybe a drill that we didn't do so well, I'll put more time on that for the next day. But certainly before practice, a lot of times I'll show them the edit of what I want to do and then, what I want them to do within the practice. And they certainly have the autonomy to tell me too long or we don't need to do that, stuff like that. So it's been helpful to have their input on that. But yeah, both after practice and before practice, we'll look at the practice plan and see what we're trying to accomplish for that day.
Okay. Talk about the process of hiring an assistant to replace ones that moved on. Coach Powell is probably the best example of that.
Yeah.
But kind of talk about what that replacement process looks like and what you're kind of looking for in an assistant coach, rather, before you kind of bring them in.
Man, I'm telling you, man, like, I don't interview guys that much. It's almost like the same way we've gotten the players, Aaron. Like it's usually through like word of mouth. As you spoke, Kyle Williams not only has all three of his boys playing for me, but he's done a tremendous job of getting families like, Saddiq Bays and Jason Gibson and a few others to come this way. And just like I'll say, like when I interviewed you, certainly we had space, like, you had the qualities of what I was looking for, supremely hard worker, in love with the game, in love with different facets of the game, not only teaching it, but come from a background of like film, statistics and analytics, like all that stuff becomes important when you're trying to put a staff together. But more importantly, you just try to find some people that you're willing to lose with, so it becomes an energy thing for me. Certainly I have these guys working, they're not just watching me work, but ultimately, like, when the game's over, win or lose, especially if we lose, do I want to go to Cactus Cantina with you and debrief about the game? You know what I mean? So it's some guys you win with that you may not want to hang out with. So to me, part of it is like finding the guys you can lose with.
Gotcha. Okay. Talk about, let's get back to practice for a second. I know I'm skipping around quite a bit, but talk about, like, you guys were in a lot of single digit games this year, and you came out on the right end of a lot of them as well. What do you do in practice as far as drilling or, the conversations that you're having with players to give them confidence, or assistant coaches kind of talk to them as far as just kind of creating poise and just them all kind of being prepared for that moment?
Yeah, a lot of situational work on the clock. Usually cheat against the first five and put them down by a lot where they can't come back. But as long as they, cut it close, I'll tell them that, I did that on purpose and stuff like that. But a lot of situational work and just talking about how to play through poise, a lot of free throw situations. I think sometimes we coaches, we forget that tight games are going to come down to free throws. So if you're scrimmaging, you got to incorporate free throws as a part of the scrimmaging, make or miss, how you set up your defenses. But I agree. I think the more poised I am and the more poised the staff is, even though we're getting after it, it allows the kids to be poised and not panic. At the end of the day, I try to exhibit that kind of confidence that I have, that we're prepared enough for any situation. As you've seen in the past, we've been down some big games and didn't panic and been able to come back and stay the course.
Okay. What have you learned about motivating your best players versus kind of keeping role players engaged? Especially if it's a kind of a younger kid. Younger players have to wait their turn. How do you get them to stay locked in when it's not their time yet?
That's a tough one. That's a tough one. I think we all coaches know that that's tough. It's almost as tough as the day you have to cut kids. It's having kids on your team that give you that unbelievable effort every day. But like you said, it's just not their turn. I just think staying in their ear. I think demanding them to be excellent in practice, given that we scrimmage quite a bit, even if it's controlled in the half court. So I think always having them be engaged in a competitive way. I think sometimes if you do just too many drills or you're only doing stuff as scout, those guys don't feel like they're sometimes getting better. So I keep preaching about improvement, but I do make that known. I say there's only two reasons that you're not playing for me. That's usually because either you're not ready to produce at the level that I think we need. But the second part, which is probably about 85%, is what you just said, Aaron. It's just not your turn. It's just not your turn. Somebody else can do it better than you at this point. And when it's your turn, that's the cycle of basketball. So we try to keep them engaged. But as far as the best players, I've always believed in being super tough on them, super demanding, have, high expectations for their effort, not so much their production, but just their effort and their focus and their attitude. I've been, I'm like, if you're going to get all the playing time, and when I yell at you, you don't tend to come out of the game. There's more responsibility with that. So with the reserves, I try to be much more encouraging about taking chances, being risk takers. You can't zero mistake yourself into more playing time, right? Usually as a reserve, you're coming out of the game anyway. Whether you make a bunch of shots, whether you make 3 or 4 turnovers, but I try to give them the confidence that, be poised, be intelligent, but also be a risk taker, like believe in yourself, like you're coming out anyway.
Yeah. No, that part's important. And a lot of time that blunt honesty is kind of rough to communicate to guys because they don't always receive it well. So talk about dealing with the expectations of a nationally ranked program, like the one that you had this year at the beginning of the season. You kind of came into the season with a ton of expectations coming off another MAC championship last year, brought in a big transfer into Caden Lewis. They reclassed down to sophomore year and, played a big role coming off the bench, especially with the injury issues that you had. Talk about the expectations of a nationally ranked program versus some of your earlier Sidwell teams that didn't have a quote unquote stud.
I mean, I'd be lying if I said, you don't take on that. I wouldn't call it pressure, but like you said, expectation. And sometimes you take it on from the kids because like I didn't have it for me. I think most coaches that's worth their salt. You try to keep the main thing, which is improvement. And try, like you said earlier, having your team peaking at a certain point. But certainly the kids, you take on, some of their energy sometimes. And, I try to keep them, under wraps and under control to let them know that like those rankings are subjective at best. And that the only one that does matter, if it does matter, is the last one. And so I try to keep them focused on, just playing the game in front of them. Because sometimes, like when you have a high ranking like that, Aaron, and you feel like, I always say boxing is the only sport you can defend, like the defending champion. Because if you lose, somebody else takes the belt. But in basketball, I try to tell them, like, no, we're chasing a whole new trophy. Like they're not going to come take the one that we got. Like the state and the MAC, like those will hang forever. And so, because I think if you're defending, the root word of it is being defensive, and like you're trying to hold on to something that's not even yours. And so you're not out here attacking something and chasing greatness. And I think early in the year, compounded by the injuries, I do think we had a little bit of that. Like, man, like we're defending, and if we lose, we're going to drop out. We just never had that notion before, and I felt a little bit of that at the beginning of the year from the players, that they were holding on to something as opposed to just playing.
So let's talk about the beginning. That was actually my first year in the DMV, I think 2018. Yeah. Was it? Yeah. When you guys beat a really, really good, really well coached Wilson team with Coach Hernandez, the Mitchell twins, had Dominguez Stevens, had Jay Heath, had Darren Buchanan coming off the bench. and you guys kind of shocked the world in a sense. Kind of bring me back to that game and kind of what you felt kind of going into it, and kind of the game plan that you had that you think would give your guys a chance to be successful and get that trophy.
Man, what a moment, right? I mean, just being able to play that game on the back door of my neighborhood that I kind of grew up in, and just having a bunch of family and friends be able to come out and see us. I mean, that was a magical run we had that year. You know, we had taken some L's late in the season in conference. I think we lost the MAC championship to Flint Hill that year. It's a good team with Caduce, Wahab, and those guys. And but we came into the state tournament feeling confident. We had a doozy of a first round game against McKinley where we almost lost. We didn't play very well. Jason Gibson hits a buzzer beater to win it for us. And sometimes you have those moments right there that kind of re-energize and refocus your team. And then we had an unbelievable game against St. John's in the semis at Georgetown. And I think by that time we just got back to that belief that we had that year that we could beat anybody. We just had to execute at a high level. We knew what type of challenge they presented with their size and just their talent overall. And I just told the guys, I thought that looking at that year, if I scouted them, most of the games that they lost were games where they were close. Like they blew a lot of people out, but every game that was close, they lost. And so I thought that was the compass, was to give the guys the confidence that if we kept it close, that our poise, as you mentioned earlier, would take over. Because in that moment, as we see in the NCAA tournament all the time, you can tell that they are trying to hold on to something greater than what we were chasing, right? We were chasing something and they were trying to hold on. And there's an embarrassment level. Not that Coach Hernandez had this, but it's hard for teenagers to say when they're hearing that they're going to win by 30 or 40, it's hard for them to get out of that mindset once the game becomes really tight, back and forth.
Gotcha. Coach T. Johnson is the head coach at now Jackson Reed, then Wilson High School. You guys won another tight game in the DC State tournament. DCI I forget. Yeah, y'all, whatever. The championship game. What did you say to him in the handshake line? What was your kind of message to him, and what do you think of him as a coach as well?
The first one?
No, this last one. This
year?
Yep.
I mean, in that moment, like I guess it was better. What you can say is better than, when you win at the buzzer. It's just hard to like console the other coach. We had a pretty, I wouldn't say easy, but it was a comfortable win this year. So I mean, he's my cousin. So that's one thing that a lot of people.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so I think he's a tremendous young coach, unbelievable worker. His guys get better. I mean, he teaches the game at a high level. So, I mean, at the end of the day, the only thing I can tell him is that, man, he's right there. I mean, he's continuing the legacy that they start. I mean, obviously he was with Hernandez on their run, but they've been in the championship 5 straight years. And so, the last 2-3 years on his watch. So at the end of the day, like, you just telling him, like, just keep up the great work. I mean, that's all you can really tell him. Like, there's nothing in that moment, like, you can't console him but so much because, it just hurts to lose that final game, at the grasp of what we all hope to win at the end of the year. Certainly, the fact that they keep coming up short against us as well. So I'm sure that has a double meaning and a double hurt to it. So just try to keep him encouraged and just tell him how good I think he is.
So we kind of talked about the David moment with you guys kind of clipping Wilson in that championship game. Goliath moment was kind of this past season. You had a big game down the home stretch of the season against PVI at a neutral site location.
Sure.
How do you feel about people calling your win against PVI an upset? And talk about the injuries that y'all had this season, because I think that was the first national game that Caleb Williams played in, right?
Yeah, I mean, he missed a ton of games this year, a couple of injuries, and like you said, we were never full strength. And most people think full strength hurts you in games, and what they really do, it hurts you in practice, and developing chemistry and confidence and timing. So even when they do come back, there's a sense of the timing that's in the rhythm that it takes a season to get. You know that as a coach, so that time missed in practice is equally, if not greater, than missing them in games. So. I just thought it was, like, once again, I give Glenn a lot of credit for taking the game, especially that late. We were trying to find another date on the calendar that made sense. I thought it was great for the city by being on President's Day, no other games, or President's Weekend, no other games being played that day. So had a great turnout. I mean, I'm okay with whatever people call it. I mean, I certainly knew and was confident that we had a chance to win the game without diminishing how great they were, and they deserved all the accolades that they were receiving all year. So we knew it was going to be a tough game. But once again, I mean, we just put a product out there, Aaron. Like I think, and I'll say this on your podcast for people to hear. I think that as good as I think I am, or as good as people say that I am, and I appreciate that. I think what's gone missing is when people say upset. I think people are still caught into Eric Singletary when I was climbing this race and doing it with what they consider less talent. And I think people still put me in that category where they give me more credit than my players. And I think if you look across that bench, my players can go pound for pound with anybody else in the DMV. So calling it an upset, I get it. Like at the time they were #1 in the country in some publications, but I think the people that really know basketball know that game could have went either way. And so it can be not expected, but an upset maybe a little bit much.
We're gonna get that game again next year. Any news on that?
Look, I'm open to it for sure.
Okay. All right. So 2 more questions and then some quick hitters, and we'll get you out of here. What have you learned? Kind of, this is a crazy week for college basketball coaches. There's a lot of movement. What have you learned about being offered kind of coaching jobs at the next level? What is that process like? And what advice would you have for high school coaches that are kind of in that position?
It's a tough position for us. I think that, once you're used to being in charge somewhere, there's a lot of stability in high school. But I certainly say if it's a dream of yours, even if it's not a dream, you have to be open to it. Like myself, I'm open to the possibilities and the conversations, and you have to think about it. And I'm more open to it than I was, when my son was a little younger. But I would say just pay attention. I mean, like at the end of the day, I think one of the things that always had me hesitant, Aaron, was that it's not basketball as much as it's a lifestyle change. Basically you get hired to get fired. You get hired to have to take a new job that's, provides you more players or more resources, more money. So it's just a different game. And I think you need to be aware, what it is before you step into it. But I think high school coaches, it's difficult from also because we're not a part of search firms and search engines, and we may not have agents who can do that legwork for us. And I just think the college game, just like the pro game, kind of ends up recycling itself because there's a trust level of the people that's already on that level that knows the ins and outs, and maybe they don't particularly trust the high school guy to be able to come in and be the CEO of the program, because I agree with that 10% of the job is coaching. The other 90% is dealing with alumni, the president, the provost, the board, the media, and just the whole thing, just being, the front and center CEO of the whole program is something that I think most DMV coaches learn that because we are that. The spaces that we occupy, especially some of these independent private and Catholic schools, we deal with that on a smaller scale. But so I definitely think that I'd be prepared to make that jump if it ever came my way from that standpoint. But certainly more open to it. Wouldn't break me not to do it ever, but certainly don't want to turn down anything that may be more fruitful for me in my career.
That leads perfectly into my last question before the quick hitters. What makes the DMV different? Is it, from the rest of the kind of hotbeds of talent in the country?
I mean, without being in all the different hotbeds, right? I mean, obviously I went to school in Houston, so a ton of talent in the state of Texas and even in the city of Houston. Certainly, you grow up learning about New York and Philly and, just this Eastern Seaboard and, West Coast. I mean, there's plenty of places, but I think the concentration of the DMV being so small, I just think per capita, you just have so many good players, and credit to a lot of the youth coaches, who sometimes get denigrated. I think they do a great job of at least getting those kids prepared to compete at the highest level. So once they get to high school, it's usually like somewhat of a seamless transition for some of them. So I just think that we do a really good job at the youth level, and just the Potomac Valley and all the things that, you experience. These kids have traveled and done unbelievable things, and even locally, just some of the wars they have with one another, if not going down to Baltimore, all the way down to Richmond. And I just think once you get to high school, man, I just think the amount of coaches, the amount of good coaching, real programs, right? Not just teams, guys that have run programs, all the way through middle school like me. Like I coached the high school, but I also coached the middle school team. So I just think you have a ton of good coaches, a ton of good players, and a small concentrated area who knows that's what they're known for. So now every kid that grows up wants to be a part of that fraternity.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's get through these quick hitters. What's a game show you think you could win?
Well, I hope it's Jeopardy since I watch it the most. And I know a lot of miscellaneous information. That's
Okay.
the nerd in me. I
All
hope
right.
Jeopardy.
There you go. Invite 3 basketball minds to a dinner to chop it up with.
Oh God, Huey Brown.
Hmm.
Huey Brown. 3 basketball minds. John McClendon, the late John McClendon, Huey Brown, and what's one more basketball mind I want? Maybe Jerry West.
Hmm. Sure, they got some good ones for sure. What coach have you stolen the most from?
Jay Wright.
You're right. Okay. The talk about the one that got away, the one recruit that you almost had that you really thought would have been great at Sidwell.
Oh my God. There's two. I'll say most recently Terrence Williams.
Hmm.
And then, man, I was absolutely in love with, I don't know if you remember Trey Wood,
Hmm.
who played at St. John's, and I think he ended up at LIU, Brooklyn, perhaps.
Okay. That was just before my time here. I think I
Yeah,
was 16 or 2017. MJ or LeBron?
MJ.
Nice. What book is a must read for every basketball coach?
Ooh, Morgan Wooden's book.
Okay. Gotcha. I'll have to check that out. I actually haven't read that one yet. Would you rather take a charge from Shaq or try to guard KD with the game on the line?
Guard KD with the game on the line.
No, no one has chosen the Shaq
Because I said, at least with the KD one, he might miss.
Yeah.
Like Shaq's, they're gonna call a block, but they may not call anything. And even if they call a charge, I'm injured.
What's the best dynasty you've seen in basketball?
That I've seen. Chicago.
The Bulls. Okay.
Yeah, the Bulls.
Give me an underrated Twitter follow.
Underrated Twitter follow. Man, I'm so social media like baby. I'm a baby when it comes to social media. Oh, I can't answer that one.
Okay. What's a great podcast or YouTube series that you're plugged into?
Oh man, like I gotta shout out my boy, the great John Bernthal, Real Ones. I was featured on one of the episodes, but he's his #2 podcast, I think, in the States, if not the world. Big time actor. We went to school together here at Sidwell. So shout out Real Ones.
Perfect. Okay. What was the first time that you were in a room when you realized you didn't know anything about basketball or maybe just didn't know as much as the people around you in that room?
Probably at the Rock Nation dinner, 2016, Houston Final Four. It was a dinner for assistant coaches and all head coaches, learning about what it takes to be a coach at the next level. And Daryl Morey and all these different, heads were in there, and that's why I learned that 10% is coaching, and the rest of the stuff is the CEO and all that stuff. So yeah, I was around some heavyweights that night.
Hmm. What coaches do you study? I know you mentioned Jay Wright. Are there any others that you really kind of look at what they do really closely, offensively or defensively or culture wise?
Yeah, a ton of them, man. But I'd say a few. John Beeline, from his offensive concepts and movement and spacing. Kelvin Sampson, from just a toughness standpoint of how to get guys to play all out, and like I said, Jay Wright, um, down to I'm trying to think who else I like. Um, who else do I like? I've always liked Mike Bray.
Hmm.
Yeah, I've always liked Mike Bray.
Hmm.
So it's a bunch of guys, though. There's a bunch of guys I look at. I'm a fan of coaches.
Okay. What's the hardest shot in basketball? What spot on the floor or what type of shot?
Ooh. Uh, the guys are making it at such a proficient clip now, and it's hard for me to say the corner shot, even though I still think that's the toughest angle to make shots. But the kids now, I mean, we practice on this shot a lot, but I'd say I'd take any kid in the gym now and shoot him in a game of pig and make him make bank shots. I don't think they could do it. So the bank shot has become the hardest shot in the
game. You dating yourself now, Coach. It's an OG shot.
Yeah.
All right. So last one is your defensive coach. Do you think the hand checking should be brought back at every level of basketball? Maybe not all out shoving, Michael Jordan steering him with his hip, but more not calling block fouls, when they're kind of sliding with hands up type deal.
I mean, I tend to like, even though we guard and we're really physical and tough, I tend to like the freedom of movement. But I think the referees, honestly, Aaron, have adjusted to allowing the quick punch as long as you get out of there. So if you're saying somewhere in between, like, Derek Harper and Jordan putting their whole hand in your hip and like guiding you to being able to like just have it there, as long as it's not a disadvantage and you kind of leave the discretion to the ref, I'm okay with that. We learn to play through that. That would benefit us.
Yeah. I actually lied. Last question that I just thought of right now. What's like the time that's left in the game that you would feel most comfortable playing a player with his fourth foul, like an important player?
Like when you bring him back?
Yeah.
Or
what point does it matter that you would leave him in the game? Say, oh, there's X amount of minutes left.
It depends on who they are. Honestly, like I couldn't make a blanket statement. It depends on like, if I knew the temperament of like how they play. Obviously, I could change defenses to try to protect them. So with that being said, just to answer your question, I think depending on the status of the game, whether we win or losing, but let's say it was even, right? Then I think anywhere between 4 minutes, like 4:30 to 4. You should be able to play that segment, throughout the game where I would feel comfortable losing him if he did pick it up.
In minutes, sorry, this has also popped into my head. So as far as minutes for your guys, do you have kind of a card where a certain rotation kind of comes in, or that's just something where you lean on your assistants, or is that just a feel thing?
Yeah, I don't. I still do it from feel. I see a lot of guys with cards. I've been thinking about, you never want to be stifled and say that you're away, and you try to, I'd love to talk to some guys who do that. But I've always done it through feel, and usually it's feel through practice. Like that's what I'm saying. I actually take practice like very seriously. I take the scout very seriously. So I take the matchup, like kind of like who we're playing. Like I may know the first 6 or 7 guys, Aaron, as far as rotation, how I may want to get Cam out of the game at the end of the first quarter, maybe at the 5-minute mark, and then so he can sit through the timeout. So I have somewhat of a feel for those first 7 guys, as far as like it being rotational. But the rest of the guys, if I'm trying to get up to 9 or 10 guys, that's usually by feel.
Okay. And sorry, I promise this is the last question.
It's all good.
Tell me about your team kind of going into next year. Some of the pieces, and how you kind of expect them to progress in their new role next year, and what you think they'll come back from their summer AU experience kind of having in their bag.
Yeah, hopefully I can keep these guys, the biggest challenge for any coach at this level, and, with all the media and the attention is hopefully they'll come back as humble, if not more humble than they were this year, ready to work their tails off. You cannot lose a Cam Gillis and think you're going to be better, right away. So Caden Lewis and Caleb Gillis got a ton of big shoes to fill. So I'm hoping that the guys can come back one healthy. But like I said, to me, if they're humble and like really ready to work and not starting to read some of their press, then we'll have a chance to be good again. But it'll be a challenge no matter what. You lose guys like Cam Gillis, Chris Russell, Charlie Taylor, Arenze Achafusi, and Selden Pickens. That's a heck of a senior class of guys who have played at different components of the program. You got Cam all the way as a freshman, and you got Selden, who came up as a JV player, Charlie, who came up as a JV player, as well as Arenze. So guys who've come through your program, who knows what it's all about. Hard to replace that when your culture's at the forefront of what you do, and you lose 5 guys who understand culture. We got a lot of work to do.
Got you. All right. Well, I appreciate the time, Coach. Let the people know where they can find you on social media.
Man, I think I know my handles. It's SFS Coach 5 at Twitter.
Yeah.
And I think it's uh, E Singletary 25 at on IG.
Okay.
But easy to find though. Like like I said, I'm still a baby when it comes to like some of this social media stuff.
Gotcha. Appreciate the time, Coach. We'll catch up soon.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it.